Okay, we are good to go. So once again, good morning. Our recording has started for the purposes of everyone who needs to see it again over and over and over again, obviously as well as those who couldn't make it here today. So today we're talking about buyer representation, buyer interview, and especially I want to focus on the buyer agreement, the actual agreement that you can sign with a buyer. So we're going to spend some time on that because that's an important part of your buyer interview. So everyone also watch, we're going to have you unmute yourself as I call on you if you're asking a question. This is an integral part of working with buyers, the interview itself, creating those relationships. So I want your questions, and I want to know how you navigate it, and let's perfect it together, shall we? So with that, when I say buyer interview, it's truly important that you understand that every first meeting that you have with a client is an interview. It needs to be treated that way, as we saw with the seller interview process and the seller mastering seller series. If you treat your appointment like an interview, you will present yourself accordingly. So any appointment, people say, oh, I have an appointment with a buyer, I have an appointment with a seller, I have a listing appointment, I have a buyer appointment. I urge you to change your language. It is a buyer interview because it changes the way we present ourselves. If any of you have been on a job interview, and I know all of you have, you change your mindset when you're going into an interview. You change how you dress, you change how you respond, and you also change how you react prior to that meeting. So we talked about seller presentation, sending an interview packet, a seller resume packet in advance. You can do the same thing with buyers, and you create this impression that it truly is an interview, and it formalizes the process. It creates a little bit more of a formal environment. It shouldn't be stuffy. It should always be comfortable, but it absolutely changes the dynamic, okay? And it also sets your expectations with your buyer. So, it allows you to be able to speak with that buyer one-on-one and understand their needs and talk through things, okay? So we've got steps, just like in any interview process, we've got steps involved in the process. So the steps you're going to be looking at is setting the stage. You're going to be setting up for the appointment, setting the stage. We're also going to do a needs analysis, understanding the buyer's needs, what's important to them, what are they looking for. We've got to educate them on the process, the overall process, so that they know what to expect. If a buyer is truly informed in the process, then they are better equipped to follow your lead throughout. We're going to set their expectations of the outcome of any scenario that can happen. We're going to explain your value proposition, just like we would with any client, because our focus here today is that on the interview and determining the start of a working relationship with that buyer. You're going into this interview to determine if you can meet this buyer's needs. And if you can, and you feel you will work well together, then you're going to work to set the stage of an agreement where you have an actual formal working relationship with this buyer. The key is to understand that you don't want to represent every buyer. Just because they want to buy a house doesn't mean you're the person to sell them one, okay? You need to be able to keep control of your goals in your business and ensure that you can provide them what they need. Some buyers have unrealistic expectations, and you may not be able to meet those expectations. Or you just may find that it's a personality that you can't work with. So please, be mindful. You're going in to determine, just like we did with sellers, you're going in to determine with a seller if you want that listing. And if you want that listing, you're going to take it. Okay, same thing with the buyer. You're going in to determine if you can work with this buyer, you can meet their needs, and if you feel as though that's the case, then you're going to begin. All right. So let's talk about the overall details in setting the stage. Okay. Again, I'm going to watch our chat. Don't be afraid to throw questions up. Okay. In setting the stage, you want to prepare yourself for this meeting, and you want to prepare the meeting. In most cases, in an interview process with the buyer, you're going to try and meet them in the office. Now, we've got a very different world now, okay? In a perfect world, you'd get them into the office. It sets the stage for professionalism. It gives them a sense of who you are. Every one of our facilities is designed to impress your client so that they feel really great about the company you work for and that you have the power of a quality company behind you. But it also allows you to set the stage, to put yourself in your environment. As you know, in most cases with our sellers, we meet them at their home, at least for the first appointment, because you need to see their home. Okay, the second time you meet with them, you may see them in the office. Okay, with a buyer, it's very rare that you'll meet a buyer at their home. You may meet them at the office, you may meet them at a coffee shop. In today's world, you may meet them in a Zoom meeting, and that's okay too. But you want to set yourself up for the presence and the impression that you have a quality company behind you and you're a professional in your field. Okay, so, and just like anything else, when you get into this environment, you need to first start with your needs analysis for your buyers, okay? That is the first step in any working relationship. You're not gonna sit down and talk about you. This is not show and sell. It's not what it's all about. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. Your goal here is to sit with them and understand their needs. So you're going to do what we call the wants and needs analysis, understanding what it is that's important to them. And we have a list of questions that you can ask the buyer, and we have that in our downloads, again, under education, a list of questions that you can ask. It helps you become familiar with their needs. Now, there are a few tips that you need to look at when it comes to wants and needs analysis, okay? There's, first of all, you're gonna focus on what it is they need. Many people have a lot of wants. That doesn't mean that their budget allows them to get everything that they want out of their purchase. So focus on the needs, and you're going to be able to navigate through that based on the details of the house. They may want a 2-car garage, but they may not need a 2-car garage if they can add one later or they've never had one before. They may want 2 bathrooms, but they may be able to get away with 1.5 bathrooms as you start talking. And it's as simple as saying, okay, well, you said you want 13 bathrooms. Okay, that's great. I understand that. In your budget of $100,000, you want 13 bathrooms. Let me ask you, if we found you a house with 1 bathroom, do you think that would be enough for you? Now, I'm being a little facetious here, but when you talk about a realistic scenario, they may want 3 bathrooms, because we all want 3 bathrooms, okay? You need to narrow it down. Well, if we found a house with 3 bathrooms, you say you want 3 bathrooms. If we found one with 2 bathrooms, do you think that you could make that work? Well, yeah, of course. You know, if it had 2, that'd be okay. So now you're narrowing down to stay with what they need versus what they want. And in a wants and needs analysis, you're asking them, when it comes to the house, what criteria needs to be in place with that home such that if it didn't have it, you would never buy that property. Because if we set ourselves up with too distinct of a search and there are too many parameters, there are going to be very few properties that are going to come up on that list. So you want to keep the list of criteria general in nature, because the last thing you'd want to see is you had a search for a minimum of 3 bathrooms and they found a house that only had 2 bathrooms. They went to an open house and they bought it without you because they were fine with 2 bathrooms, but your search only said 3, okay? Those are just a couple of examples. So it really comes down to what is it you're looking for in a house. More importantly, talk about the lifestyle. There are also some key words. You know, there's some phrases in real estate we have to be very mindful of when it comes to discrimination, okay? And it may not feel like discrimination, but it's words that we need to avoid. And that's as simple as a word like family, okay? What are the needs of your family? And I know that sounds funny because, you know, we talk about that a lot, and we talk about a great family neighborhood and what have you. But we also need to understand that there are folks out there that don't have a family or would like a family and can't have one. It's all about their definition of family, okay? So I urge you to use words like household. You know, what are the needs of your household? What does your household look like? You can ask questions about what their household looks like, but you know, avoid certain terms. That's also in your advertising. You'll see that, you know, even in your advertising and MLS and what have you, you know, you can't say, you know, great family neighborhood. You know, you can't say safe neighborhood if you have no idea, no way of knowing whether or not it's a safe neighborhood. So you're going to get into conversation with them, and you're going to ask them questions. Okay. Now you're going to have, you know, all the questions that are available, right? Again, you know, as an attachment. I don't want to pull it up on the screen for the purpose of our time because it will all be there for you. But it's as simple as talking about lifestyle. Okay. Who will be living in the home that you purchase? Tell me about your lifestyle. This, you know, tell me, what do you enjoy doing at home? What's important to you in a home? Do you have any special needs that need to be accommodated, such as athletic equipment or handicap accessibility, anything like that? Location, tell me about your ideal location. What does the perfect location look like for you? Describe that to me. What are you looking for when you drive home at night? Okay. The house in general, are you looking for a certain age of home? Are you looking for a certain style? Interior, what's the function of your home? You know, again, bedrooms and bathrooms and things like that there. But a lot of the questions we don't ask are the lifestyle questions. You'd be amazed that how people have this thought process in their head of this perfect home for them. And it turns out they buy something completely different. You must hear that all the time, and you witness it. Okay. You know, they say buyers are liars. You know, buyers are not liars. They just don't know what they want. So they're going to tell you, I hate raised ranch. I'll never live in a raised ranch. And if you live in a raised ranch, it's nothing about raised ranch. It's just my example. So, you know, I don't want a raised ranch. You know, I just don't like that up, down, and what have you. You know, I'll never own a raised ranch. And then they go out, they go to an open house, and they buy the most beautiful, perfect raised ranch that's perfectly suited for their household. So, you know, so it's not because they're lying to you. It's just they don't know. And there's a feel. And always communicate with a buyer. There is a feeling that you have when you walk into the house, and it may look nothing like you had envisioned, you know, but you're looking for them to find that feel. And when you communicate with them and explain to them that you understand the feeling, you may not have the feeling because it's not you buying the house, but you understand the feeling. And your goal is to find them a house that when they walk in the door, they have that feeling. Make sense? So utilize the questionnaire. It's there to just drive you, you know, your conversation with the questions that are needed. Okay. So, you know, they also need to realize that, you know, there is absolutely no perfect house out there for them. You know, it will not meet every bit of their criteria. So another question in that questionnaire could be something as simple as, what 3 things are most important to you in this process in finding a house? What 3 things does the house have to have? Then let's talk about the wants and let's add to that list. So you're just trying to help walk them through that process. Okay. So use that questionnaire and you know, create one of your own. You will formulate questions as you go. Now, the education process of this whole meeting is the most critical. And for those who were in our seller series session, it's the same. It's about educating them with the entire process so they know start to finish what they can expect. Now, I feel as though I may need to even jump back because some buyers may not even make the time to come in for this interview. And that's an ideal world. In most cases, you're going to meet a buyer who saw a house on the market, wasn't looking, fell in love with this house, wants to look at, when can you get me in? And you're going to have multiple showings, and it's going to have multiple offers, and their hearts are going to be broken because they just got into the market. They weren't prepared to do that, and all of a sudden they're competing with other offers, and they haven't even spoken with a bank. That's the reality of real estate. It's hurry up, you know, drop everything, do it now. Now, that would be the realism of the market. But that doesn't mean right after that all happens and their dreams get shattered that you help pick up those dreams and say, hey, this isn't the way to do this. Let's do this. I don't mind. Let's meet at my office and let's talk about the process. Give you an idea of what is involved in this to help you take the necessary steps in order to best prepare for when that next dream home comes on the market that you're prepared. Would that be okay? Great. When are you available? Okay. Now you may have different language that you're using with verbiage to ask that question, but ultimately all they want to know is that we're here to support them and we're doing everything that we can to help them with that. Okay. Now, part of that meeting, it's critical, and I give that example because that's the reality of what's happening out there, isn't it? You know, if you're buying internet leads and you get buyer leads, all they want to see the house. They don't care about an interview. They don't want to meet with you. They don't want some song and dance. The last thing they want is some presentation from a salesperson. And as you know, we're not salespeople. We're in the customer service industry. But that's all they think of us as because that's what the public has presented us as. So the last thing they're going to be excited about is coming into your office so you can sell them. But you can explain the process to them so that they truly know what to expect. And explaining that transaction from start to finish. Now, the question we might say is, well, how do I do that? You know, literally in your mind, you want to go through the transaction chronologically to explain to them what to expect. Now, if you're brand new in the industry, you may not know all of the chronology of the transaction yet, but you will. And literally, you don't need some presentation. You don't even need notes on it. Speak from the heart. Because again, you know, other than in a Zoom meeting, you're going to speak with them, not at them. Okay. So you want to talk to them about the process. And Mr. and Mrs. Buyer here, you know, I'd also like to explain to you what you're going to experience throughout this transaction so you can be completely prepared. You see, finding the house isn't my job. Anybody can do that. My job really begins when you found it. And I want to talk to you about the process of the transaction because as a professional realtor, my job begins when we find it. I'm going to help you find it too. And you're going to help me look for houses because it's not all about me finding them for you. You're going to be online much more often than I will be looking at houses. You may find the house and we're going to schedule it and look at it together. But it's really once we've negotiated. And to start with that negotiation, once you've found the house that meet your needs, we're going to make an offer. And I'm going to walk you through that process. And we're going to go through the details of that offer, much of what we're preparing for now, and speaking with a loan officer and getting you pre-approved. The negotiation will be dictated by the situation, and we'll walk you through that. And once we agree on that pricing, we're going to go into a sales agreement. And that will be the time that you will be obligated to that purchase. And you'll put a deposit on the sales agreement to hold the property. And we'll discuss that deposit at that time. You just want to be prepared that any money you have is liquid to allow for that deposit. We'll identify the terms of your agreement, the sales price, the financing, any concessions we're looking for with the financing, any appliances you might be asking for, and we will go through all of that together. Now, by the way, guys, that's my quick overview of an agreement because you're not going to know the details now, so you're just trying to prepare them for that step. Once we sign an agreement with the seller, the timelines are going to begin. You're going to need to go to the bank to ensure your application is underway and that they have what they need and that they're ordering the appraisal and working on your loan. And in the meantime, we're going to be scheduling your home inspections, and we're going to have 10 business days to conduct any and all home inspections. And not only any and all home inspections, but to respond to the seller if there are any concerns and discuss and or negotiate any concerns that we find with regard to that home inspection. It's also your opportunity to change your mind if you're not happy with the results of that home inspection. In the meantime, the bank is going to be doing the processing. They'll be scheduling the appraisal, and there'll be a period of hurry up and wait. We've done everything, and now we're just waiting for the final details. You're going to get your homeowner's insurance binder. You're going to be coordinating for the closing, and all of the details will come together. And at the end of the time period, we're going to do a final walkthrough to confirm the condition of the property and go to the closing, and we're going to celebrate together because you're now going to be a homeowner. And I promise you, every step of that transaction, I will explain in detail everything you need to know, every potential outcome involved, and ultimately help you make the right decisions for you and your needs, because ultimately every decision in this process is yours. All I can do is advise and help you make the best decisions for you and your household. Will that be okay? Great. Now, guys, let me ask you. I just went into scripts and dialogues there. do you truly feel that you can overall explain that general process to a buyer? Do you? Okay. If not, you want to step back and you want to just go through that in your mind and reiterate in your mind so that you are able to present that. I didn't say a whole lot of much because you don't want to get into the weeds here. Now is not the time to talk to them about concerns and things like that. They are going to come up, and it's going to be difficult in some respects, especially the negotiations. But your goal here is to give them an overview of what to expect in the transaction. Now, by the way, your presentation, your interview presentation will have all of these details. Does anybody know, or does anybody here have a buyer presentation that they've used? Anyone? Raise your hands. Okay, I see some hands raised. You're doing the physical hand raise. Remember, we're on Zoom. You're supposed to click a button. I see Roxanne says yes. Michael says yes. Tammy, yes. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to start down the list. Roxanne, unmute yourself. Tell me what's in your buyer presentation, if you will.
So there's actually a visual piece for them to follow, the buyer to follow along. And it just goes from start to finish, from meeting with the real estate agent all the way to the closing table.
Awesome. And is that something you've put together? Is that something the team has, or where did you get all the details for that buyer presentation?
Something the team has,
Okay. Awesome.
Rob and Christina put together.
Awesome. Cool. Good stuff. Michael.
So I use the same one actually, and we also include a little bio on the team so they get a little idea of each and every one of us. And we also break down how we get compensated also, so they understand that portion too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Very good. And that's a perfect segue to the next topic. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because the
Awesome.
compensation, is key. You have to be able to discuss that. So thank you for that. And good to see you, Michael. Thanks for
It's a
joining our
pleasure.
call. All
Thank
right,
you.
cool. Tammy.
So I have like I make up like a folder for them with all helpful information about buying their first house. And then I really try to just sit down with people, like you said, like bringing them to the office, or like, to explain everything to them. This way they understand the process. So it helps out later on, where things come up, and I try to educate them as
Awesome.
best I can of what to expect. Simple.
Beautiful.
That's what I do.
Awesome. Thanks. Do you have visuals and things like that in your
Yeah.
presentation?
I have like a buyer package that I put together, and I add some stuff to it, and things
Beautiful.
like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you for sharing. Roger. Roger, I see your hand up. Can you hear me? There you are.
Yeah, great. I've collected a number of things over time that I use in a buyer interview, and I always try to meet in the office. I think that works well there. The office does give a great impression. One of the things I do have is a flow chart about the process of the buyer interview, and then what happens after that, right through negotiation, making an offer and so forth. It really, really comes in handy. I'd be happy to share that with anybody if they'd like to have that, because
Awesome.
that helps the buyer understand where he's at in the process. So, and then I have a bunch of other things that
Perfect.
I use.
No, and I appreciate that. Roger, would you mind sharing that flow chart with me? I'd love to share it with the group.
All right, I'll send it to you by email.
That'd be great. Awesome. I think every tool, is critical, and we need to all personalize those tools. And I want to make sure you guys have the most robust presentation possible. So thank you for that. Now, along those lines, gang, if you're thinking, well, where do I get the information for my presentation? It's all done for you, right in our technology, right in downloads in the Marketing Design Center. you have both a buyer and seller package. It's in the system under sellers right now. So I urge you, if you're looking in there, don't look under buyers. I don't know why they do that because it's a combined presentation for sellers and buyers. So I think they just put it there under listing. So find that. But ultimately, you're going to be taking that information and you're going to download it and use what you want. It's in a PowerPoint version. You can show it on your tablet in person with the client, or you can print it out and bind it and do whatever you want with it. But it's full color graphics that show the entire process, everything that we're talking about, and it's done beautifully. You use what you want and add what you need and personalize it. So Roxanne and Michael, I don't know if the team uses any of the details that are in there, but I urge you to go in, check it out, and you know, we can always enhance everything we do, can't we? So you know, if there's anything in there that will help you benefit with that program. Christina may have pulled some of it out, but you know, just a heads up, you know, never be afraid to enhance what you're doing, okay? So thank you guys for sharing, great stuff. Whatever it is that works for you, remember gang, people are hiring a personality. People hire people. They're not hiring a company, they're hiring you. You need to go in there with your personality. Don't go in there with any stuffiness or rigidness. When I say interview, I'm not saying tighten up and pretend, you know, to be something you're not. You still have to be yourself, but you're still asking for a job, aren't you? You're asking for the job to complete and help them succeed their goals. So, you know, you still need to present yourself in that manner. Now, Michael mentioned compensation, and I'm going to dig into that in detail, but most importantly, in this meeting, you need to explain to the client how you get paid. You know, I don't understand why it happens, but in most cases, buyers don't understand how a realtor gets paid. And I think it's one of the most critical parts of the equation. And in general, and we're going to look at it because we're going to spend time on that buyer agreement, but in general, the buyer doesn't have to pay anything because it's normally covered through the brokerage fee that's being paid by the seller. Also notice I always use the term brokerage fee, not commission. Salespeople earn commissions. We earn brokerage fees. You're receiving a fee for brokerage services rendered. And you need to be comfortable talking about your brokerage fee with the buyer and explaining how they get paid. And also explaining that it may not even affect them financially because in most cases, the seller is paying the brokerage fee to the listing agent, and the listing agent is sharing that with the selling agent and compensating the selling agent. Now, a conversation may go something like this with your buyer. You know, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I would like to just talk to you about how I get paid, may I? You know, of course, everyone goes to work to get paid. I happen to love what I do and I feel like I don't work a day in my life, but we all go to work to get paid. Similar to yourself, you go to work to get paid, you get a paycheck at the end of the week, you know, like most typical, you know, jobs, you get a paycheck at the end of the week. Well, in real estate, I don't get a paycheck every week. I work on a success fee. I only get paid when I'm successful on your behalf and I've actually accomplished your goals. What's important to me is that I explain to you how I get paid so that there's no question. I find that many buyers in the marketplace just don't understand how we get paid and quite frankly, afraid to even bring it up because, you know, they don't want to be charged. So maybe if they don't bring it up, they won't get charged. And you know, that's not the way to handle this. So, you know, I want to talk to you a little bit how I get paid. And you know, as your buyer's representative, I get paid a brokerage fee for my services and I get paid at closing. So only upon the success of your closing will I get compensated. Now, you may find that as a buyer, you don't have to pay me at all. Now, you see, the fee for my services is X. Now, guys, we're going to talk about that in the form. So I just want to leave it generic right now. The fee for my services is X. And there are different ways that can be compensated. And in most cases, you'll see that the seller is offering compensation through the listing agent, and I'm getting paid in that transaction. There are times, however, that they're not offering compensation or that amount of compensation. And there are two ways that we can handle that, okay? you can pay the difference of that compensation directly at closing, or we can negotiate the remainder of that compensation as part of your offer in asking the seller to pay the difference of that fee. So should there be a situation that comes up where the compensation is less than what we've agreed on here, then we can simply include it in your offer so that the seller is paying it on your behalf. And we'll discuss that when that time comes. Will that be okay? Great. Because as you know, again, we all go to work to get paid. And while we all want to love what we do, and I do, you know, I also don't want an uncomfortable conversation when the time comes. Do you have any questions on that at all? Now, end of script. And you all know that I hate scripts. Scripts should be dialogues, because with dialogues, you're talking with people. Scripts, you're talking at them. So somebody share with me how you feel about everything that I just said. Raise your hand.
You make it sound really easy, Dean, but it's a very
Well,
difficult
thank you.
conversation.
If not, by the way, if you noticed, even I fumbled through it, and I've said it a zillion times. But thank you for that feedback. And by the way, you will fumble through it. The key is to talk from your heart. You know, it's one of the most awkward conversations to have is compensation, but it needs to be done. And I just want to give you the paradigm. If you go to your accountant to have your taxes done, you probably ask how much they charge. If you go to your doctor, you probably don't ask what it is because you're probably covered by insurance with a deductible, but you know that you're going to get an invoice and you know they're going to get paid somehow. So in some cases, you might ask them how they get paid or what that looks like, or just complain about the bill when you see it because you didn't have to pay it, but you know they're getting paid. Okay? If you go to the, a dentist, you know how much your cleaning is, you know you're going to get an invoice. So why is it that realtors don't talk about their pay? It's okay to get paid. You're going to earn every penny of it, and you're going to spend every moment in that transaction informing them so that they can feel the power behind that value behind that fee. So when you get that heartfelt sentiment of, listen, here's what I'm going to do for you, and you're going to share it all. If all they do is think that you show them a house and they miraculously go to closing, like they show on HGTV, it's up to you to educate them so they know differently. Okay? You need to feel that fire in the belly, that emotion in the heart. Who else wants to share? I'm afraid to share because I might ask you to share. Roxanne.
So I think one of the things that Christina had explained to us is that, you're essentially the brokerage fee, you want to show what you're worth.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're talking to them about, what that brokerage fee might be, and it's more so that you're showing them that that you're worth this and you're going to commit to that.
Yes. Beautiful. And that's great. And that's part of this whole interview process, isn't it? It's to show them the value, show them what they're getting for this service, within this service, that other agents may not give them. Other agents are just going to go out and show them a house. Okay? And they might show up at the closing. Now, even in today's world, you may not even be able to go to the closing because many attorneys are asking realtors not to come to the closing to limit the participants in the room. But that doesn't mean you're not present, So to show your value proposition, to your point, Roxanne, is so important in everything that you do. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Who else? Quiet group here today. Okay, so now I gotta put somebody on the spot here. Again, Megan, where are you?
Right here.
There you are. I have to scroll through the images. Now, okay, so I'm willing to put myself on the spot here, and I love this. So So, having worked with you for a few closings now, do you feel as though at every point I explained to you the process and you knew everything that you could expect at any point in the transaction?
Absolutely. And even though I had been through it, you always made sure you went through it again, just in case things had changed in the world or my household had changed, and it had each time I worked with you. So I think that, and then really how the whole fee worked. But I did have a question. You
Please.
talked to, and I know I will probably learn this at some point. I'm literally on 3 hours of real estate learning, but you can negotiate, because I know you've changed your commission depending on when you were working with us. So is that something that once you enter that agreement, you could change? Because you said maybe make the seller work it into theirs, but what if you, after working with them, are willing to go to a different percentage?
Yes, great question. So, so at any point you can choose to negotiate your fee if it means the client getting the house, if you have to adjust your fee, if you're trying to bridge a gap with pricing, with sellers, if you choose to, reduce your fee, you can absolutely do that. Now we're going to hit on the buyer agreement, and we'll show you that in the clause itself and how to explain that at that time. But as a professional, you can choose what your fee is, which is why I use the expression fee of X, because each and every one of you will choose the fee structure that you feel is valid to your business, because you're all individual business owners, and I support that. My role is to ensure that you feel the value of what you bring to the table and that you get paid all of what you're worth at any turn. So when you discuss it, if for some reason, this is our fee, and let's say your fee is 3%, okay, you will find in some classes you can't discuss numbers, but we're all within the same company, so antitrust allows us to use numbered examples, numerical examples. So, if your fee is 3%, and for whatever reason the MLS is only offering 2.5%, you can choose to accept that 2.5% and not ask the buyer to pay any difference. Or if they ask the seller to pay the difference and the seller refuses, or it would hinder their ability to purchase that property because you're in a multiple offer situation, never should your compensation come into play with the buyer's ability to own this home. So you can choose to elect, either not to ask for the additional or not to, okay? Or to reduce the fee to bring the negotiations together. But I only suggest that you reduce your fee when you are bridging a gap successfully. So I've seen sellers come back with a counteroffer to a buyer where they say, well, I'll make a counter of X, and that's only if the agents cut their fee. Well, why am I being part of your negotiation? Now, if that means, hey, we're $1,000 apart, and the agents want to come together and each do 500 to make it work, to make the sale, that's different from being part of somebody's counteroffer. Okay, that's similar to a buyer saying, hey, I want to make an offer, but if you waive your fee, my offer will look better. The fact that somebody wants to sell and somebody wants to buy shouldn't be our financial responsibility, but at the end of the day, we do have the ability sometimes to help bridge those gaps. And in the case where you had said where the fee may change, you may also find that you have repeat clients, and we toggle between sellers and buyers in everything we talk, but you may find that you have repeat clients and you're not going to even ask for that extra money above and beyond what's in MLS, because this is a repeat client. Why would I, force somebody's hand with that, because I appreciate the repeat business. Also, with a seller client, you may find that you reduce your fee from what your standard fee is, and you offer an incentive to them because you appreciate the repeat business. So you have the ability to adjust what that is, and we can look at that each scenario you have and what's fair between the parties.
Thank
Yep.
you. But
Yeah,
to
of
answer your
course.
question, you did always explain, and I think that's why we kept coming back to you, and I don't want to take up all everyone's time, but sometimes I always felt like you knew all the little details, because as a buyer, I was so focused on my house and what I was doing and what I wanted that it was always your value of having you making sure that all the little things didn't fall. So that's why I think going through it every time makes the buyer feel I don't have to worry about every tiny little I to dot and T to cross, because I know from personally, and hopefully my view will change, but your mind's swirling when you're looking for your house.
That's right. Well, and that's why you may find yourself saying, you know, listen, focus on your family, focus on the details. Let me handle this. I will cue you when you need to know something, you know, because you do have too much going on. And and I mean this honestly, you're one of my most educated clients. You're very detail oriented. You come from a career that required you to be very detailed, and I mean that. But at the same time, I also explained something to you over again because you had so much going on. So if, you know, and just for the benefit of the group, it's always important to say, listen, I know you've been through this, but I just want to go over this again so that we didn't miss any details. You know, it's okay to re-educate a consumer. Don't ever assume that just because they're highly educated or do very detailed work for their profession, that they're going to remember every detail in your transaction. That's what you're there for.
Thank you.
So thanks for letting me put you on the spot. Okay, so that's the key there. So you're going to set their expectations. You're going to talk about the transaction. You're going to review everything that they're going to come about, but you also need to show your commitment to their needs. You also need to show your experience in the industry. By the way, that's even if you're newer in the industry, okay? You still have more experience than them, even if you just started this month, okay? Now, I say that a little bit facetiously and a little bit humorously, but, you know, like, think about it, you know, and at some point, it's okay to say that to them. And I do remember there was one time at one point in my career when I first started 31 years ago that somebody said to me, you know, Dean, you know, like, you're so new in the business, you know, why would I trust you? And I literally looked at him, I said, you know, I may be new in the industry, but I've been in it longer than you have. And sometimes you can make light of a conversation like that and then just go right into the conversation. And I may be newer to the industry, but I have an incredible team behind me, almost 300 professionals here at HomeSmart Professionals, and we all come together to support one another. And you know, I know that I've got a broker to support me, and I've got other colleagues to support me. So, you know, whether I'm newer, never say newer to the industry or not, I know that I'm qualified to protect you and to walk you through this process. And you need to feel that, okay? Talk about your negotiation skills. Talk about the support that you have in all of those negotiations. Explain to them how the market is and how multiple showings and multiple offers are happening. You know, by the way, buyers will probably have to lose one or two houses before they realize that you mean it when you say that houses are experiencing multiple offers and you don't have time to think about it. Yes, you need to make the right decision for you and your household, but you may not have a chance to sleep on it over the weekend because it could be sold. And sometimes buyers have to lose a house to know that you knew what you were talking about, because some will think it's a sales pitch. Sometimes you even have to say, listen, you'll never get a sales pitch from me, so don't ever think of me as a salesperson. I want you to think of me as, you know, as your representative, okay, and your consultant. And I'm only going to tell you how it is. You need to decide how you want to proceed based on how it is, okay? So set them up for that, give them an overview of your experience with that, and also explain your value proposition, okay? What is it you bring to the table, okay? Now, I'm gonna test those who may have been in the class for sellers or may have heard me say this before. Somebody tell me, what is the one thing that you can provide to that client that nobody else can provide? Anyone? Kathy, are you raising your hand? Unmute.
Not for that question. I had another comment.
Okay, so hold your other question. And anybody have the answer to this question? What's the one thing that you can bring to the table that nobody else can? Roger. Unmute.
Self.
Yourself. Thank you. The answer was in the question. Thank you. Yourself. And that is why you're talking to this consumer, this future client, about what it is that you're going to do to represent them. And you can even say it to that, the one thing that nobody else can bring to the table is me. And what I mean by that is my passion, my excitement, my, what's another word for it? You know, my dedication is the word I was thinking of, to your goals. Nobody else can give you that. And you're going to meet a lot of agents along the way. But I know that that's the one thing they will not bring to the table. So I look forward to working with you. You need to be confident. So whatever you need to do to build that confidence in that discussion, you know, you need to be able to bring that. So what are you bringing to the table? What is the experience? What's your availability? What are you doing to, you know, what is your availability that meets their availability? By the way, if they only have time in the evenings to look at properties and you are not available in the evenings, then you either need to buddy up with someone to help you with that client or refer them to somebody, because those are needs. When we talk about can you meet their needs, you know, that's a crossroads in whether or not you can meet their needs. You can't always be saying, well, okay, well, let's wait till next Sunday on a Monday because you're available on Sunday. You know, they're going to need to be in sooner. So, so what are your needs? What, you know, for those on a team, what are the team procedures? You know, what are the aspects of the roles within the team? So you're trying to bring to them that experience and what you, that value proposition that you bring to the table. Kathy, back to your question.
My question is back to when we were talking about like the Home Smart stats, you know, we have almost 300, you know, agents, et cetera. Is there someplace, Dean, that we keep like current numbers and whatnot? Like we had this many transactions. Is this one centralized thing that I can download and take a look at? So when I am meeting with someone, I can say, hey, we sold this many, in 6 months, we did this, we did that.
Yep. So, and thank you, because you're reminding me, we discussed that in our last series that we wanted to create a flyer, and I'm trying to remember who actually suggested it. It might have even been Sharon. I'm not sure if I'm putting you on the spot, Sharon, but I'm trying to recall, you know, to have something like a flyer all in one place. And we started working on that. I'm going to check the status of that. So, however, bits and pieces of it, you know, you'll always hear what's happening in our roster when, you know, when we post anything. You have access to a copy of our roster in the RSA and the downloads. If you ever needed to reach any of our associates, that's not your responsibility to go looking for it. I know that, but just know that it's there as well. And if you go into marketing downloads in RSA, you have all of the stats. We quarterly rank our stats. We don't live by stats. Many companies live by stats. All they do is check their stats, and they change their stats to you know, you can tweak any stat to make it read what you want it to read, right? You know, like, you know, we're #1 in the city of Warwick, in Apponaug, on Spruce Street, between numbers 20 and 30. We can change that however we want to. However, we do follow stats because we always want to know where we rank, and we want to be able to use that to our advantage. Now, we've been very fortunate for the past 3 years to be the top selling company in the MLS system in the state of Rhode Island. So you have the beauty of these stats because they work for you, and that's with no search criteria, just all of MLS, all of the state of Rhode Island for sales closed. So we're excited about that. We don't take that lightly, but we know that's not without your hard work. So if you go into marketing downloads, you will see under stats, you will see all of those stats, and it's done in a very well-designed visual flyer for you that you can print up or have within your presentation. So definitely find that as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dean.
But to your point, we talked about creating a flyer that had some general information, and I'm going to follow up on that and look to make sure that we get that in there for you guys.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep, you bet. Awesome. Anyone else? I think we're good with questions. So then ultimately, after you've educated, after you've gone through all of the details with the buyer, you've talked about your value proposition, you've educated them on the process, you've answered any questions they have, you've talked about your compensation, you're basically down to the point where you've got to decide, is this a mutual fit? Do you feel that you can work well together? Okay, you know, and if so, you're going to ask to get started. Okay, Mr. Buyer, if you don't have any other questions, I feel really great about the fact that I can accomplish your goals. I think we'd work really well together, and I'd like to get started. You know, Are you comfortable with that? Great. Now you go right into the next phase, and that's a buyer agreement. Now, we're going to review that, okay? And we're going to go through that. Some are comfortable with it, some are not. Some are afraid to bring it up. Some are afraid to ask commitment. Others are not uncomfortable with it in any way. But my goal here is to help you become comfortable with it so that you feel confident that you're setting out the gate with a working agreement with a client who's committed to you as much as you're committed to them, okay? So we're gonna go through that. So buyer agreement, I'm gonna do a screen share. For the purposes of the recording, I don't believe that we have the ability to do a screen share for the recording. So know that I am looking at the buyer agreement and gonna be going through each section of that. And bear with me, guys, because this literally closes every screen on my computer when I try to do it. Can you see my screen? It's okay to just nod. Buyer agreement on your screen? Excellent. I see nodding faces. Thank you. I see thumbs up. Thank you, Michael. All right. So here's the thing, gang. If you haven't seen this form, this is the exclusive buyer representation agreement. Before we get too detailed with it, I want to clarify that this is not the agency representation form. And these forms are available in Instanet, which is part of your MLS program where we get all of our documents. Now, you always need to discuss representation out the gate. You need to explain to them the forms of representation that you can take in working with them. You can work with them as a transaction facilitator, where you don't have the obligation of representation to them, or you can work for them as a designated client representative, where you take on the responsibility for them and you're acting on their behalf. That disclosure form, the representation disclosure form, is important and must be signed at the first meeting with any particular buyer. That's separate from a written agreement. It's kind of like doing that disclosure form with the seller to identify your representation in the conversations, and then deciding whether or not you're going to sign a listing agreement with them. Same thing here. The relationship disclosure form is a mandatory document, and you're going to ask them to sign it. And they may not want you to represent them. They may want you to act as a transaction facilitator, and they may refuse to sign that form. And that form allows a section in the back where you can complete it and say, we discussed it, but they weren't comfortable signing it, whatever that looks like. But this is separate from the relationship disclosure form. Make sense? Okay. So this is the buyer agreement. So regardless of what that aspect is, you're going to have the relationship disclosure form in your file. You may go out and work with them. You may even represent them as a buyer's rep without a buyer agreement. And that's okay. Our goal is to have you obtain a buyer agreement with the buyer. But it's okay if they're uncomfortable signing it and you feel you have rapport and you want to take the risk in working without an actual agreement, then I support that. Okay, there are many buyers I've worked with. I felt I didn't need the buyer agreement because we just had an incredible working relationship. There are some that I felt it was important. Okay, it's not a required document. But I want you to understand the concept of it, and I want you to try to become comfortable with it, because you really should have the commitment of the buyer client, in working with them, especially in a market like this where buyers are just frantically looking for houses, and they may just go buy something without you if you don't have their commitment. You need to be committed to them. They need to be committed with you. Okay. So this is the exclusive buyer representation agreement. Okay. ultimately, in the first sections, and I'm going to breeze through a couple of sections because, you know, they're pretty standard. Okay. The parties, identify yourself and them as the buyer. The term of the agreement. What is the term of the agreement that you want to be committed to this buyer? Depending on the buyer, it may be a short term and it may be a long term. In the marketplace we're in, you know, it's taking buyers a little bit longer to find homes because of the multiple offer situations. And, you know, I mean, our job is more of a counselor these days because we're trying to, you know, counsel buyers, you know, in helping them pick up their emotions and, you know, move on to the next house when they lose out on a house and you know, they're struggling with securing a property. So you may say, well, I go into an agreement for 90 days, okay? Personal experience, there were times I did 90, there were times I did 180 days, okay? 3 months, 6 months, whatever you feel is appropriate. You can always extend it at any time, and you can always cancel it at any time as well if for some reason you learned that this is somebody you should not have gotten into business with, okay? Your name as the designated buyer representative. In this case, you wouldn't be acting as a transaction facilitator. You would be acting as a designated client representative in representing that seller, okay? The buyer will acknowledge that they received that mandatory real estate disclosure form that I just discussed, and that identifies your relationship there, okay? It identifies as the representative what are your duties, helping them find homes in certain geographical areas, certain details. You'll assist the buyer with locating and viewing property with negotiation for terms and conditions. You will protect the buyer's confidential information and not disclose it to other parties. You know, if a buyer has a home to sell, that's a confidentiality detail. You don't say, oh, you know, I want to show my property. Well, does your buyer have a home to sell? Well, you know, that's you know, a situation that would be confidential to my buyer. Now, it could be casual conversation, but it shouldn't be in the terms of negotiation unless you have the ability to disclose it. Now, some agents will say, why are you being so secretive? It's not about being secretive. It's a detail of my buyer's situation. If they have a past credit history situation, maybe a bankruptcy in their past, that's not something you're going to discuss with somebody else. Does that make sense? So, you know, everything is confidential unless the client has allowed you to dictate it otherwise. Then it talks about the buyer's duties, okay? Working with you exclusively. They agree to be reasonably available to view property. It can't be your fault they didn't get to see a property. They're going to refer to you any leads of any houses that they come across. They're going to authorize you to verify their financial information, to talk to their loan officer, things like that. You know, buyer agrees to share any and all inspection reports with the designated representative. You need to know what the details are when it comes time to negotiate for inspections and handle that, okay? The duties of the other licensees. Now, when we say duties of other affiliated real estate licensees, that specifically pertains to every other colleague of yours in the HomeSmart family, okay? Those are your other affiliated licensees, and this just identifies that while you work with those colleagues, they are not obligated to this client. You are not obligating the company to the representation of the client. The representation is yours with this client. Does that make sense? And it also says that all of your other colleagues have the obligation of confidentiality as well. While they don't represent your buyer, we all have obligation of confidentiality. And that is because if you have a situation with your client and you're dealing with that and you come into my office and we're discussing that, first of all, I have that first in information. If my door is open and somebody else happens to hear that conversation, they've now heard that conversation. So everyone owes each other's clients confidentiality, but not representation, okay? Dual facilitation, it talks about the potential of a dual facilitation situation. Now, I want to be mindful that we don't want to go into an agency class, but it is important that you're able to discuss what dual facilitation is. Now, when it comes to dual facilitation or representation, there are times when you're going to be working with both parties in a transaction, where you're working with the seller as well as the buyer. Your relationship with both of those parties is going to dictate whether or not you have the potential of entering into a dual facilitation. When I say the potential of it, in a dual facilitation, you have a situation where you have a pre-existing relationship with the seller, as well as a pre-existing relationship with the buyer, and they come together on the same property. We all need to know that we cannot serve two masters. You cannot represent two parties in the transaction. You cannot look at a seller and say, I'm going to represent you, I'm going to look out for your best interests, and I'm going to negotiate on your behalf. And look at a buyer and say the same thing in that same transaction. I'm going to look out for your best interests, I'm negotiating on your behalf. That's just not possible. Okay, you cannot serve two masters. So when you have a pre-existing relationship with both parties and they come together on the same property, you have the option of a neutral dual facilitation where your role changes to where you no longer represent both parties and you're only facilitating on behalf of each party. You can only do that with the consent of both parties. Both parties have to agree to relinquish their representation and have you simply facilitate, where you cannot negotiate, you cannot consult, you can refer them to attorneys for questions that they have, but all you're doing is facilitating. And in facilitation, it is simply dictation, it is simply explaining the details of a contract, not their contract, and walking them through the details or timelines and what have you. Now, there are going to be some clients that are going to be comfortable with that. There are going to be many that are not. And should the time come that happens, where your buyer, who you represent, wants to look at your listing with a seller you represent, you may be forced to refer one of those parties to a colleague in your HomeSmart family to assist that party. So both of you have the representation, both clients have the representation that they need. Now, compensation is separate, okay? Immediately in a commission success fee-based environment, we think, oh my God, I got to give up half of the sale. Like, you know, I mean, dual facilitation is different from double ending. So you can negotiate whatever that compensation is with your colleague that you refer one party to, and we can sort through that when it happens. But the bottom line is that this is about the representation of both parties. And the fact is you can't represent both. So regardless of what the compensation is or will be determined, the clients deserve representation because that's what they originally hired you for. Okay, so this part of this agreement, and by the way, I can't see a chat box right now with a screen share, so we're going to get to if any questions come in there, and we're going to hit on that. But that's what this says. Now, the simple way to explain this clause is, and number 7, if we look at the other licensees, this refers to all my colleagues at HomeSmart. They don't represent you, so they don't owe you the loyalty, but they do owe you confidentiality in case something is overheard in the office. The dual facilitation section says that there may be a time that when you want to view a property that I may have listed. And as a professional, I can't represent two masters. So should the time come where you find a property where I already have a relationship with that seller, both parties need to decide if you're comfortable relinquishing your representation, or if you'd rather I refer you to a colleague or the seller to a colleague, because you can refer either party. Refer one of you to a colleague in my company so that both parties have the representation that they expected. And we'll discuss that when that situation arises. Okay? That's the simple way to discuss it because you're not in that situation. You're going to need to discuss it should the time come, but now's the time to just let them know that there is the potential of that happening. And when it happens, you will have a full conversation with them. Okay? Now, again, I don't know that I have the ability to see any chats. So if you do have a question up there, I'm going to get back to it. This is the segment that I feel is the most important right here, and that is the compensation, because this is the part where you're going to be explaining to them the compensation. Okay? Now, if you haven't had a chance in your presentation to discuss the compensation, this is the time that it's going to come up. It forces you to do so. Okay? So Mr. Buyer, I just want to explain to you how I get paid. May I? Great. Ultimately compensation, is paid upon closing. I work on a success fee. I'm only paid when I'm successful in accomplishing your goals. And ultimately the fee for my service is blank, okay, is X. Now, this is the time that you need to decide what that is. Now, I want to give you a couple of different scenarios here, because if we fill in the blanks, it all makes sense, okay? So it can be that so let's say it's 3%. Now, we can see that it's very rare today, especially in this most recent market, that 3% is being offered by the listing agent. The listing agent has the ability to offer whatever compensation, with the seller's permission, whatever compensation they want to. As a buyer's agent in coming in, the compensation that's being offered in MLS. You don't have the right to ask for more than that. Okay, you can't make a contingency that they split it equally. You can't say it has to be a minimum of something. Whatever's offered in MLS is what you're being paid, and you've agreed to that when you agreed to show the property. Now, if it's lower than what you've agreed to with your buyer client, then you need to discuss that during the time of the offer so that the buyer knows the situation. Don't ask your buyer for additional compensation if you've never discussed compensation and have a buyer agreement. Without a buyer agreement, you can only be compensated what's offered in MLS. And I want to make sure that you understand that. Don't out of nowhere say, oh, I'm not getting paid enough in this sale, so, let's put something in your offer so I can get paid more. This offer is about them in this house. Now, I know you say, of course I wouldn't do that. Well, some do, and that's why I need to say it. Ultimately, without a buyer agreement, you're only going to be paid what's in MLS, and you need to be comfortable with that. That's another benefit of this document. So, Mr. Buyer, the fee for my services is 3%, okay? Ultimately, the listing agent from the seller will be paying a compensation, will be offered in MLS, and that will be applied towards that fee. If they're offering 3%, then it's completely covered. If they're not offering 3%, any amount lower than that, the variation can be paid by you at closing, or we can include that compensation, as part of your offer, where you ask the seller to pay the difference on behalf of you for my services. Okay. Now, in this section, in completing that, and I'm going to toggle back and forth before, the physical component of this and the conversation of it. Okay. So this says, if the buyer purchases a property listed in MLS, offered as a for sale by owner or a private sale, regardless of what kind of sale that is, the buyer agrees that they owe you this money. It may be paid by someone else on their behalf, but they're agreeing that they owe you this money. This is an agreement between you and the buyer. This is not an agreement between you and any listing agent of any property that they find. Okay, so if they go to an open house and find a house and make an offer without you because you weren't in touch with them, or they forgot about you because they haven't heard from you in a while, doesn't make you a bad person, but it's the reality of the situation. And they go on to make an offer, and they go into an agreement with that agent who was at the open house. You can't call the listing agent and say, hey, I have a buyer agreement with them, you have to pay me. No, this is an agreement with you and the buyer. Now, you may have to seek compensation from the buyer because you have an agreement with the buyer, but this is not an agreement that guarantees you pay from any listing agent if they go buy a house. And I've heard it out there in the marketplace. Buyers call, oh yeah, are you working with an agent? Because you should ask as a seller's agent. Are you working with an agent? Oh yeah, I am. They told me to go find a house and call them if I want to make an offer. Well, that is not buyer representation. And even if you didn't intend that to happen, if you lost touch with them, that's what it became. So I want to clarify that this is an agreement with the buyer, not with the listing agent. So in here, okay, it could be a flat dollar amount if you work on a flat fee basis, or it could be a percentage. In most cases in MLS, it's a percentage that's offered. So if your fee were 3% or 2.5%, you would put it on that line for 2.5% or 3%. And then it says of the, the total gross purchase price. In most cases, you're paid on the net price, and it's discussed in MLS whether or not it's the net price, okay? So if you're paid on the net price, even as a seller's agent, if you only charge the seller on the net sales price after any closing cost concessions, you should be also compensating the co-broke on the net sales price and vice versa. And then or other, please specify. This is where you would identify any other details surrounding it, okay? Now, for the purposes of experiential learning, I believe in you getting paid every penny you're worth. I've seen buyer agents receive 2.5%, 3%, 3.5%, okay, depending on the services that are being provided. Make sure you're providing those services, okay? I've seen administrative processing fees on the buyer side of the transaction. I respect whatever the fee structure is, as long as it's within the commonplace of the market, and as long as the service is provided in correlation to it. In my own experience, I never wanted a buyer's compensation to come into play with whether or not they got a property. So, you know, in my experience, I always accepted what was offered in MLS, but I had a minimum amount, and you can choose what that minimum amount is. So let's say your minimum is 2.5%. We can see in MLS right now, common, because there's no standard in real estate, common is 2.5%, or 2% is very common. 3% is very rare. By the way, on the listing side, I always compensate 50-50. My own practice only. It's not expected in the marketplace, but you know, I've been around long enough to know that it's appreciated with colleagues, and we all deserve, you know, every penny we've earned, and we've all earned every penny we've earned. So in this agreement, I would fill it out. If I'm willing to accept what's offered in MLS with a minimum, I would fill it out as offered in MLS, minimum 2%. Okay? At some point, we're not getting paid adequately, and at some point, we need the buyer to help us out. So let's say you say my minimum is 2.5%. Well, you would put in the percent line 2.5%, and on the other line, you would put as offered in MLS, minimum 2.5%. Follow me? Or you just say, this is my fee. It's 2.5, it's 2, it's 3%, whatever that is, okay? You need to be comfortable with that, okay? So I feel as though, personally, compensation should never come into play, but you should have a minimum. So if it's anywhere in that range, I'll accept that. Here's the minimum that I want to agree to with, you know, and Mr. Buyer, all I ask is that should the compensation offered in MLS be less than this minimum amount, that we include in your offer that the seller pay the difference on your behalf, so that you don't need to, unless you prefer to pay it directly at closing. We can handle it that way as well. Okay? It's okay to have just a very light, candid conversation about this compensation. And if your fee is 3.5%, you need to feel confident with all of the value proposition that you've just presented prior to this conversation, okay? They need to know what's commonplace in the market. They need to know that, generally speaking, 2 to 2.5% is what's being offered. My fee is 3.5%, and that's because of all of the value that I've discussed with you here today and all the value that I bring to the table. And I don't want to see you have to pay that yourself. If you prefer, we can include it right in your offer so that the seller pay the difference on your behalf, or you can pay it directly at closing, okay? And we can discuss that right at that time, okay? You need to be truly comfortable with talking about that. But even if your fee is, hey, I'll take whatever's in MLS, I just want to secure the buyer, then you just put on that other line, as offered in MLS, okay? This clause is not here to dictate that you get a minimum standard of your commission. This agreement is designed for you to secure a buyer in a working relationship. So if you say, you know, I'm not comfortable asking them for more money just yet, and you're trying to build up that confidence, okay, then just do it with as offered in MLS, because it still obligates the buyer. So if the buyer goes out and buys a home without you, and what was offered in MLS is 2%, then according to this working agreement, as long as you fulfilled your half of it, then the buyer does owe you compensation. Now, that's not going to be a comfortable conversation, but as long as you've explained it to them and they knew how it works, How many times do we hear today that the buyer's like, I just didn't know how this worked. I thought you made salary. I just when I found a house and I just made an offer. I didn't know how that works. I call it that, Monday morning quarterbacking. I call it the Monday morning buyer call. The buyer calls you Monday morning and says, hey, Dean, great news. We found a house. Oh, okay, awesome. That's great. Give me the address. I'll set up an appointment. We can go look at it together oh, no. We already did that yesterday. We went to an open house. We made an offer. We signed agreements last night. I wanted to know what we do next. Well, we need to talk because there's a lot more to that. So it's that Monday morning call that we, educate your buyer. You go to an open house, you give my name, here's some of my cards, give it to the agents at the open houses. You call on a property, make sure you tell them you have an agent. The only thing they need to do to identify that they have an agent and a buyer agreement is just to say, I have an agent, I just wanted some information, okay? Educate, educate, educate. They need to know. That one statement alone solidifies your working relationship with them as procuring cause. And the compensation in MLS is offered to procuring cause. So as long as they've identified your working relationship, you are protected according to MLS compensation. Okay? So I'm going to get back into dialogue, but just the compensation, it identifies, that should they purchase a home during the term of this agreement, that compensation is due. Number B2 says if within a certain number of days of the termination. I might suggest 90 days and something like that. That just covers you that if for some reason you show them a property the week before your agreement expires with them, and your agreement expires, and then that following week they go in and negotiate with the seller directly without you, you still earned that brokerage fee. So, a 90-day might be enough to just cover you. That just protects you from people trying to eliminate you from the transaction. Again, as long as you've done your share of any agreement and provided the services you promised, you should be paid for it. And I will always defend your pay. You just need to be able to defend the actions you've taken within any agreement, okay?
Dean? Excuse me, Dean?
Go ahead.
What is that line right before it? So under the 9A, buyer and to check one either is or is not responsible for paying brokerage firm the difference.
Oh, great,
So that-
thanks. So let me look at, in the event that the amount being offered by these sources listed is less than the amount due, buyer is or is not responsible for paying the brokerage firm the difference. So that is, thank you for catching that. So if you're asking the buyer to compensate the difference or to include it in their offer for the seller to pay it, it would be is. You're saying to the buyer, listen, here is my fee, and any amount not covered in MLS is your responsibility. Now again, they can ask for it from the seller, but it's still their responsibility. If you're saying, I'll accept anything that's offered in MLS, then you would check off is not, because you're not asking the buyer to, there's no real difference in that amount. Make sense? Okay. You would only use this when you have a hard and fast rule of this is my fee, and you need to cover the difference if MLS doesn't cover it. Make sense? Okay, great. Thanks for the catch.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, please, appreciate it. So, and then C, at the time of signing this agreement, the buyer agrees to pay a non-refundable retainer. We don't see non-refundable retainers. We work on success fee. So it's here if it's somebody's practice, but, and that retainer would be paid to the company, not to you directly. No monies go to you directly. It's not something that I've ever been comfortable with, my practice only. If it's something that you feel you'd like to implement, I'd love the conversation to discuss with you the terms upon which you're handling that. Okay. Buyer acknowledges that they're not in another agreement with another agent. The last thing a buyer wants is to be in multiple agreements like this because they could owe multiple brokerage fees. And brokerage firms shall not accept compensation from more than one party, even if permitted by law without disclosure to all parties. So if the seller / listing agent is offering a portion of the compensation and the buyer is compensating a portion of that compensation, the code of ethics requires that anytime you're being paid by more than one party, it needs to be disclosed in writing. So it's as simple as a document that says buyer is to, pay the balance of X, or it could be in the sales agreement. You can put compensation in a sales agreement outside of what's offered in MLS, because what's offered in MLS is already identified. So if the buyer is going to pay a difference of that, or the seller is going to pay it on their behalf, there's the language. And we have that language, remember, in RSA and downloads, we have a contract verbiage cheat sheet. So look for that, and it has all the different languages, from appraisal clauses to concessions to, compensation, all the cheat sheet items that you need. Okay? And then, that's, the others are, dispute resolution, how we resolve dispute. The key one that I wanted to hit on here is, the compensation and how to explain it. Okay? So questions on that? It's a big topic, and that's why I wanted to make sure I had the time. We're right around the time of completion here. I just wanted to make sure that I hit on that one especially. Thoughts? Anyone want to share any thoughts? If you haven't used this form before, are you comfortable using it? How do you feel after this session? Anyone at all? Everyone's dumbfounded. Who's willing to share? How do you feel about it? If you haven't used the form before, are you comfortable trying it? Somebody share.
Yeah, I'm
Kathy?
comfortable. I'm comfortable trying it now. I never was before, but now listening to you, Dean, I'm comfortable.
Awesome. Cool.
So I'll give it a shot. I just felt kind of strange. I don't know about, like, kind of. I feel when I'm that I'm kind of forcing somebody. Okay, you're stuck with me. You know what I mean? Like, and
that's exactly what you're doing, Kathy.
Yeah.
By the way,
exactly.
by the way, and you're stuck with them too, and that's why
Right.
you only want to use this with somebody that you want to be stuck with.
Right.
But it's let's look at it this way. And I see a couple of unmuted yourself, so I welcome your thoughts. Bear with me. So for a listing, okay, working with you meet a seller. Are you going to go out and put a sign in their lawn? Are you going to advertise it? Are you going to pay for a photographer? Are you going to do a floor plan? Are you going to do aerial photos? Are you going to do an open house? Are you going to just start calling all of your sphere of influence? Are you going to be doing all of these things before you have a listing agreement? No.
Right.
You're not going to do anything until they agree to hire you. So why is it that we do all the research, we set up these searches, we research homes, we drive around, put the gas in our car, show buyers all of the houses they want to see, run ragged, talk with them at 11 o'clock because the kids finally went to sleep and now's their time to talk to you, and spend all of these hours representing buyers in the hope that they actually remember you when they find the house of their dreams and actually allow you to receive that compensation.
Right.
So why do we not do it for sellers? Oh no, not until they list me. But with a buyer, we'll just do anything in creation in the hope that they might actually want us to get paid. And that's the sentiment I want you to take away from it. Now, if you have the loyalty from your buyer and you're in touch with them, then great. Don't worry about it.
Right.
But I want you to see how clear as day that is. Why are you working so hard without a working agreement, without a commitment from that consumer? Now, you got to prove yourself, and you got to do everything, deliver everything you promise. But why do we not do it for sellers, but we'll do it for buyers? That's the thought.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, good luck. Let me know how it goes first time you use it.
All right.
Sharon and Michael.
Dean, so I have a question for you because this did happen. I did use the buyer, agreement. But it's a different relationship because he's our contractor as well. But I represented him in selling his house and I'm representing him in buying a house. But what he pushed back on is, well, why do I want to, sign this? And we're talking about, this could be $5,000. This could be, putting in new appliances into the new home. So how do you?
What was the
how do you
last
adjust
statement?
it?
You faded out there a second.
Oh,
What
I'm
was the
sorry.
last statement? This could be 5,000. It could be what?
It could be, money that could be put towards them buying new appliances
Oh, yeah.
for
That's
the home.
right.
You know, so it's like, I was dumbfounded that he's, you know, I mean, I did come up with, well, you know, this money is going to, you know, my compensation will be paid for by the seller. It's coming out of the seller's proceeds, but his whole, you know, being, you know, the devil's advocate,
Sure.
you know, saying that, well, yep, that's going to lessen his ability to negotiate.
Well, you know, so there are always times we won't be able to overcome somebody's feelings on something. However, if your compensation is strictly, if this is just to get a loyalty program with a buyer, and you're not asking them to compensate anything outside of MLS, then there should be no struggle in signing this. You know, there is no extra money going for appliances or anything like that, because ultimately I'm getting paid only through compensation as offered in MLS. But Mr. Buyer, let me take it a step further. Know that if you go buy the home directly through the listing agent, you're not going to get that money back. So that compensation is either going to stay with the listing agent, or it's going to be shared with the buyer's representation based on the agreement with the seller. So you purchasing direct through a listing agent you don't know isn't going to give you a discount. They're not going to say, let me give up my pay because you don't have an agent. No, they're offering compensation to a buyer agent because that's common practice. But if you think that you're going to get it for less just because you don't have an agent, that is not how this works. Make sense? Cool. Michael, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I love using the buyer's agreement, but one thing that I kind of focus on with discretion, I normally have a good sense of their financing when I break that out. So usually then I can kind of get the sense of whether they can actually afford, if they had to, pay the difference of that MLS compensation or not. So
Yep.
I just kind of focus on the idea of whether they're actually able to pay that, or if it's going to be an issue for them down the road. And that's kind of where I make my decision.
Great. No, that's awesome. I appreciate that sentiment. And ultimately, you know, whether or not they can afford it, they still have the option of potentially rolling it into
Yes.
purchase and asking the seller to pay it. You know,
Yeah.
so now talk about the options rather than the ability. So
Yeah,
I think that's great.
Cool.
Awesome. Now, also make sure that I'm jumping back now to the representation. When you are aware of their financing details, make sure that prior to that you had the conversation about the disclosure form.
Mhm.
So the agency representation, the representation disclosure form,
Yeah.
that needs to be discussed prior to any confidential information being revealed.
Mhm.
So even if you haven't gotten to a buyer agreement to discuss loyalty, make
Yeah.
sure that you've had the discussion on the disclosure form,
Absolutely.
because you shouldn't know anything about their financing unless they've obligated you to their confidentiality. You don't want
Yes.
them to find out after that they don't, you're not obligated to confidentiality because you didn't discuss the form,
You're
and
right.
now you know a lot more to them than you should. Make
Good
sense?
point. Thank you.
Yep. So you may do this in segments. You may, at the first point of showing, if you meet them at a showing, hey, I just need you to know here's a form. It obligates me to confidentiality on your behalf. It doesn't say that it's not a contract in any way. It doesn't say that we're obligated to working together for a period of time. But I also need to, you know, I also suggest that you hold me to confidentiality on your behalf if you feel you want that representation status. Okay. If you don't discuss the form, you're a transaction facilitator out the gate, and you know, and the implied representation could become an issue.
Understood.
Great, thanks for sharing. Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, we're a little past our time. Any final questions? All right, guys, I hope this was helpful. I appreciate you checking in. Please watch the calendar. If you notice, we did have a couple of dates that shifted, and I apologize for that. For the Rhode Island Association, I have some committee meetings for the leadership committee, the board of directors, that I lost sight of here in the month of August. So definitely watch the calendar dates. I don't know if it's next week, the one that we skip again. So just watch the dates with the meeting. And Megan, I'm not sure if I sent you that list, but we can confirm that. I can send you that list. If you don't have it, shoot me a quick email because you don't have access to it in RSA yet. But so that's it. So guys, Have yourself a great day. And if you haven't used this form before, or this format of interview, I would love to hear feedback when you do either. So either or both. So let me know how it went and what I can do to help tighten up the language that you're using. So, all right. Thanks
Thank
again.
you.
See you all soon.
Take it
Thank
easy.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
My class